Today I'm going to be looking at the evidence for Jesus, but not in the Bible. Controversial. Well, a lot of people say this isn't reliable. So let's go outside the Bible to see what evidence there is for Jesus. Right here, right now. Hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Dan Beasley and this channel is all about inspiring intentional discipleship, helping you go deeper in your faith and living it out in the world today. So the evidence for the New Testament and the Bible as a whole actually is overwhelming that it is a historical ancient document, but many people will dismiss that. Even though, like in the New Testament, there you got gospel accounts of Jesus' life, things that he did, his death and his resurrection. You've got letters from people to certain churches or other people explaining how the faith is working and how it's playing out after they're trying to work it all out. People are saying, nope, that's not reliable. It was made up by people, or they got different excuses, and they'll apply that to the historical Christ and say that actually he didn't walk on the earth, or he wasn't who he said he was. So let's go outside the Bible and have a look at the documents out there, because there are some that prove that Jesus was a person roaming the earth, and he lived and he died. So there are three categories that we could look at. So you've got the Christians, which we're not looking at today because they would be deemed as unreliable or biased or trying to push an agenda. But you have the Greco-Roman world right into this. You have the Jewish world, and you have some other external documents of other people around as well, which we'll briefly have a look at. But let's get straight into this with Tacitus. So Gaius Cornelius Tacitus, born about 55-56 AD till about 118, was a Roman senator and orator and ethnographer, and probably arguably one of the best Roman historians out there. And his last major work was called the Annals, which was written in 116-117 AD. Includes a biography of Nero. Now, in AD 64, Nero burnt down part of Rome, probably to build on the rubble a new part of the city. And when people started saying it was him, he put it on the Christians, and Tacitus wrote about this. Now, Tacitus really didn't like the Christians, really did despise them, and he wrote this: "Neither human effort, nor the emperor's generosity, nor the placating of the gods ended the scandalous belief that the fire had been ordered by Nero. Therefore, to put down the rumour, Nero substituted as culprits and punished in the most unusual ways those hated for their shameful acts, whom the crowd called Christians. The founder of this name, Christus, had been executed in the reign of Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate. Suppressed for a time, the deadly superstition erupted again, not only in Judea, the origin of this evil, but also in the city, Rome, where all things horrible and shameful from everywhere come together and become popular." So from Tacitus' writings, we can get four pieces of accurate knowledge about Jesus. First of all, Christus was used by Tacitus to refer to Jesus. This was a distinctive way by which some referred to him, even though Tacitus mistakenly took it for a personal name rather than a title. Secondly, that Christus was associated with the beginning of the movement of the Christians, and whose name this originated from. Third, that he was executed by the Roman governor of Judea. And fourth, the time of his death was during Pontius Pilate's governorship of Judea during the reign of Tiberius. So you've got the scholars can date the reign of Pontius Pilate, which is 26 to 36 AD, and when Tiberius was emperor, which was 14 to 37 AD. So Jesus had to die within those two, and they were together when they think Jesus was executed about 30 AD, 27 to 33 AD. So what Tacitus is writing is clearly accurate to when comparing it to the New Testament, but people don't want to compare it to the New Testament. But there's what he's writing about is that he's writing about this Christus and these Christians, and that he was killed under Pontius Pilate and in the reign of Tiberius. So there's factual things there, and what we have to take into account here is that Tacitus is one of the top Roman historians. He's not going to make these things up, and he did not like the Christians. He despised the Christians. So he's not going to be making this up or being careless about the facts, because they just didn't do that in the Roman times anyway. The Romans were very efficient. And he's writing history here. He's writing the annals. And this is just before his death, though. He's older and he's wiser and probably more careful anyway. So what he's writing is fact from a Roman point of view, who didn't like Christians. And the other thing that Tacitus is drawing out in there, he writes that he suffered the extreme penalty, which in Roman times, and we know today, and this has been backed up, the extreme penalty was crucifixion, because it was so excruciatingly painful in the way that people died, that Tacitus writes and knows it's those little details. So he knows how Jesus or Christus died, and it was by crucifixion. So he probably did a fact check on, or he probably found out, or the history was quite well known for him to be able to write this down. You've also got something written of a most mischievous superstition that's related to Christus and the Christians. Could this be related to the resurrection, or could it be related to Jesus' miracles? We don't know. It's speculation, but he has written in there that there is a kind of superstition around, and it could be easily associated with the resurrection, because that's why Christians become Christian back then, because it's only because of the resurrection. But something is obviously going on, that he is writing that this mysterious superstition has come back, not only from Judea, but it's coming to Rome as well. So another Roman was Pliny the Younger, who was a Roman governor of Bithynia, and he was writing letters to Emperor Trajan, because he had lots of Christians and he didn't know how to prosecute them, because they were of every age, class and sex, and he needed advice on how to do the legal process. And he writes to Trajan, so he's obviously explaining what's happening and who they are to Trajan. So he's not going to lie to the emperor, because he wants to set out the case and exactly what they do. And in one part of the letter he writes, "They were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ, as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath, not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up, after which it was their custom to separate, and then reassemble to partake of food, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind." So this passage in Pliny explaining to Trajan how Christians operate is what we see in the New Testament developing, that they're being really countercultural. First of all, they're singing, they're meeting before daylight on a fixed day. They're singing the praises to Christ, recognising who he is. And even Pliny says, as to a God, they don't do any wicked deeds or bound themselves to wicked deeds, but do good things, not committed fraud or adultery or theft or falsifying the word, honouring what they're going to do. And once they've done all this, they go off and then reassemble to partake of food, which is interesting. And it says, but food of an ordinary and innocent kind, because it was put upon them that they were, because they were eating Jesus' blood and body, that they were being cannibals. So obviously it's got to Pliny that actually that's not what they're doing, and it's just ordinary food and innocent, that they're not doing anything that is cannibalism. And the other thing, that reference to singing hymns to Christ as to a God, that Jesus was a person that walked on earth and died a death not like any of the Roman gods, dying by being hung upon a cross, as Tacitus pointed out, but would have been very strange to him. But so writing, they did it as he was a god, but not believing that, but that's how the Christians were worshipping. So other things that we can take out of Pliny's letter is that the Christians held Jesus to be a god, and they held to his teachings because they bound themselves to a solemn oath. They lived out their lives in a certain way, a good way, a real countercultural way, taking the teachings of Jesus and really applying it to their lives. This is why he's writing. This is why he's having a lot of bad time, because they are living very contrary to the Roman society, and they don't know how to deal with or what to do with it. And it wasn't just a certain like what they would expect, like males. It was old, young, male, female, rich, poor. It was slave and free. It was all completely. These people who call them Christians, creating a nightmare for Pliny as the governor at the time. So from the Roman part, we see Tacitus kind of setting out some facts about who the Christians were and who Jesus was, and that he died. And we got Pliny writing about the effects of Jesus' teachings, of who he is, of that kind of them coming together for communion, or the love meal as it would have been called then, and how they're living out their lives for this person, Jesus Christ. Now, Pliny was a prolific letter writer as well, and he was a governor. So these two Roman writers are well respected, are well recognised, and for them to mention Jesus and the things that they do really adds to the evidence outside the New Testament that Jesus was actually a real person. And I'll break down in a bit all the evidence and what it kind of adds up to from all the writers that we have. So now we go on to the Jewish writings, and the most famous is Josephus, a priest who grew up as an aristocrat in the first century Palestine and ended up living in Rome and was supported by the patronage of 3 successive emperors. So there was a war, he was kind of captured, but he kind of switched side and he became Roman. But when in his writings, he was always proud to be a Jew, and he always promoted the Jewish faith in a real positive way to the Romans, always pulling out the good things, but himself being very tactful and being under the patronage of 3 emperors, which is pretty impressive, if especially in those times when it was up and down with the emperors and things going on. And he aligned himself with the emperors while they were the worst enemies of the Jewish people, because they, in 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple. So he chose to ignore the Jewish popular opinion of the hatred of the Romans by being a patron of 3 emperors and living in Rome. So a very political man, but real proud of his Jewish roots. So there are 2 great works by Josephus, The Jewish War and the Jewish Antiquities, both written in Greek for educated people. That's his market. So he was trying to appeal to the aristocrats of the Roman world. So again, it had to be right, it had to be taken seriously, and because this is his target market, they're not people who can't read or hearing it secondhand. The people are very well educated, very well read, so this needs to be right. So there's 2 references in the Jewish Antiquities, and the shorter of these 2 references is in book 20, and this is an incident that identifies Jesus as the brother of James, because it's talked about how James, the brother of Jesus, died. James was the leader at the time of the church in Jerusalem, and in the temporary absence of a Roman governor between Festus's death and the governor Albinus arrival in 62 AD, the high priest Ananias instigated James's execution, and this is how Josephus describes it. Being therefore this kind of person, that is, a heartless Sadducee, Ananias, thinking he had a favourable opportunity because Festus had died and Albinus was still on his way, called a meeting of judges, Sanhedrin, and brought into it the brother of Jesus, who is called Messiah, James by name, and some others. He made the accusation that they had transgressed the law, and he handed them over to be stoned. So in this, James plays a bit part, but the whole thing that Josephus is right about is the sole reason of referring to James at all was that his death resulted in Ananias losing his position as high priest, because Ananias went and did something completely wrong, and it's given the context of why he lost his position as high priest. But in doing that, we get James, the brother of Jesus, mentioned, and Jesus is mentioned as the so-called Messiah, because there were lots of people called Jesus, and this was identifying who it was. And this is key, because without adding the so-called Messiah on it, wouldn't have said who he was. But that's how Jesus would have been known, as the Messiah, and he's calling the so-called Messiah. So by adding that, put something on Jesus which people outside would have identified. And in this, which is interesting, he only used the Messiah because this is in book 20. Now, there's another reference to Jesus, and that's in book 18, which he would have been previously mentioned as the Messiah, or the so-called Messiah, in book 18. So people reading through would have got to book 20 in the shorter reference and gone, oh, I know who you're talking about, because this was written to Roman aristocracy, aristocrats. And so they would have understood who he was talking about, because it's a reference to an earlier reference in the book. But being called Messiah, they would also know in the area, oh, that's the Jesus who died on the cross that you're talking about. And interestingly and importantly, on this shorter extract in book 20, a lot of the historians say this is real, this hasn't been changed, because with the other extract in book 18, it has been changed. It was later changed at a later date. And so we have to understand what is of Josephus and what was added later. But this is has not been changed, and it names James, the brother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah, which is hugely important. And just to quickly add, just because Josephus was saying Messiah, or so-called Messiah, it didn't add anything that he actually believed that. He was very Jewish, and he didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. He didn't become a Christian, and this reference is a kind of a non-committal, neutral statement about what some people call Jesus, and not a confession of faith that actually asserts that he was Christ. What it does do is identify that there was a person who was alive that was called Jesus, who is called Christ. So it puts forward that Jesus was alive and did roam and was called Christ from this Jewish point of view, from this Jewish historian. So the second passage from book 18, which I referred earlier, is called Testimonium Flavianum. And this is the one that they think is being added to. Now, in the reading which I'm going to do, the italics is what is believed that's been added to. Around this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was one who did surprising deeds, and a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many Greeks. He was the Messiah. When Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing among us, had condemned him to be crucified, those who in the first place came to love him did not give up their affection for him. For on the third day he appeared to them, restored to life. The prophets of God had prophesied this and countless other marvellous things about him. And the tribe of Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not died out. So most scholars would say that it's been added to by later Christian redactors, and it kind of clearly has. But even if you take out what they've written, around this time he's saying that if Jesus, a wise man, Jesus was known to be a wise man, for he did surprising deeds, this is referring to his miracles, and a teacher of such people as gladly accepted the truth. He won over many Jews and Greeks, which he did. When Pilate, again, this historical reference, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing among us, which was the priest, so that was his trial, had him condemned to be crucified. Link back to Tacitus about being crucified in the most horrible way. Those who in the first place came to love him did not give up their affection. So even though he died, they still stayed with him, as it were, in his death. And that tribe of Christians, so called after him, has still to this day not died out. So he's saying, and still acknowledging, that they are still there. So just taking those, we have that Jesus was a wise man and known to Jews and Greeks. and that Pontius Pilate, once the high priest had handed him over, had him crucified, and that this tribe of Christians came about and have not died out to that day when he was writing it those years later. Now, Josephus would have been a contemporary, or later contemporary, would have known about Jesus, would have known about James, his brother would have known about the apostles. So this is all of his kind of generation, or the generation after, and he would have known about this. So here you have three people, two Romans and a Jew, all not Christian, writing from their own points of view, as I've been over before, and they're confirming what is written in the Gospels, the facts that we know, and these are outside, and these guys have got no agenda. So let's just go over some of these things that they have got there. So they all would say that he existed as a man. His personal name was Jesus. He was called Christos, or Christus in Greek or Latin. He had a brother named James. He won over both Jews and Greeks. Jewish leaders of the day expressed unfavourable opinions about him. Pilate rendered the decision that he should be executed. His execution was specifically by crucifixion, and he was executed during Pontius Pilate's governorship over Judea. So there's 9 points that corroborate what the New Testament say, and these are outside of the New Testament of independent other writers who aren't Christian. So let's have a look at some of the other writings that kind of reference Jesus, or there's strong references to Jesus. Lucian of Samosata, 115 to 200 AD. He was a Greek satiricist who wrote The Passing of Peregrinus, about a former Christian who later became a famous cynic and revolutionary who died in 165 AD. So what he wrote was 2 parts in the satire of this person's life, where he says, "It was then that he learnt the marvellous wisdom of the Christians by associating with the priests and scribes in Palestine. And what else? In short order, he made them look like children, for he was a prophet, cult leader, head of the congregation and everything, all by himself. He interpreted and explained some of their books, and wrote many himself. They revered him as a god, used him as a lawgiver, and set him down as a protector. To be sure, after that other, whom they still worship, the man who was crucified in Palestine, because he introduced this new cult into the world." And the second part is, "For having convinced themselves that they are going to be immortal and live forever, the poor wretches despise death, and most even willingly give themselves up. Furthermore, their first lawgiver persuaded them that they are all brothers of one another after they have transgressed once, for all by denying the Greek gods and by worshipping that crucified sophist himself and living according to his laws." So Lucian seems to have gathered all of his information from sources independent of the New Testament and other Christians' writings. And for this reason, this writing of his is usually valued as independent evidence for the existence of Jesus. Again, he's writing and setting things out about who Jesus was, who Christians were, how they lived their life, about them giving up their lives, that they would be immortal and live forever, that Jesus was crucified, and Christians live according to his laws. So there's a lot of evidence for Jesus, the way he died, and the way that Christians lived out their lives after him and his teachings. And Lucian also called Jesus a crucified sophist. Now, a sophist was a derisive term used for cheats or teachers who only taught for money. And Lucian despised Christians for worshipping someone thought to be a criminal worthy of death, and especially despised the man who was crucified. So especially Jesus being crucified with 2 thieves wouldn't have helped his understanding that Jesus was going around making money off this, so he would have hated him. So again, this writing coming out of Lucian, he doesn't like Christians, and he especially doesn't like Jesus. because he thought that he was a sophist. So this isn't a positive for Christian writing. This is an against Christians writing. There's the Bauman Talmud as well. Is a collection of Jewish rabbinical writings that was compiled between 70 AD and 500. We have to understand that the ones that are going later towards 400, 500 will be less reliable, so we're only going to look at 70 AD to 200. And the most significant reference to Jesus in this says, on the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy." So Yeshu, or Yeshua, is the name that they would use at the time called Jesus. They're talking about on the eve of the Passover when Jesus was crucified, and the heralds going around saying he's being crucified because he practiced sorcery and he's enticing Israel to apostasy. So this seems that this is another bit of evidence for Jesus. And again, because this is not for Jesus but against Jesus, and people who didn't support Jesus and hated Jesus, they're going to write in that way. So we have to understand that as well. So it might not be the way that it's told in the New Testament, but it's told in a way that is going to promote what they think about Jesus, historically accurate or not, and you could argue the toss. But what's important here, apart from those bits, is that either the Passover, Yeshua, and hanged, which is another way for saying crucified, which we have in the Bible as well. In Galatians 3:13 declares Christ was hanged. There's other evidence as well. Celsus, the Platonist philosopher, considered Jesus to be a magician who made exorbitant claims. Suetonius, who another Roman writer and lawyer and historian, wrote of riots in 49 BC among Jews in Rome, which might have been about Christus, but which he thought were incited by the instigator Chrestus, whose identification with Jesus is not completely certain, but again, there might be a link there. Marabar Serapion, a prisoner of war held by the Romans, wrote a letter to his son that described the wise Jewish king in a way that seems to indicate Jesus, but did not specify his identity. And then there are other documents, but they're more lesser relevant and not as worthy. So let's take all the evidence together. So we've got Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Josephus, Lucian, the Talmud, the other references. We can piece together fully now that both Josephus and Lucian indicate that Jesus was regarded as wise. Pliny, the Talmud, and Lucian imply he was a powerful and revered teacher. Josephus and the Talmud indicate he performed miraculous feats. Tacitus, Josephus, the Talmud, and Lucian all mention that he was crucified. Tacitus and Josephus say this occurred under Pontius Pilate. The Talmud declares it happened on the eve of the Passover. There were possible references to the Christian belief in Jesus' resurrection in both Tacitus and Josephus. And Josephus records that Jesus' followers believed he was the Christ or Messiah. And then finally, both Pliny and Lucian indicated that Christians worship Jesus as a god. So for all the people who say that there is no evidence in the Bible for Jesus because it's unreliable and it's biased and it's made up for Christians, there is a lot of evidence out there for Jesus. Remember, this is written 1800, 1900 years ago. So what survives that we have today is little. There would have been more out there. And if people argue the toss about the Babylonian Talmud or the satirical writing of Lucian, and even the part of Josephus, which was added to by Christians later, you still have Tacitus and Pliny the Younger and the first part of Josephus, which really clearly state that there is a man called Christ who was crucified, that he had followers, that Nero put some things on the Christians when he burnt down the city, that Pliny was saying that they're living this way, that they're having the Lord's Supper, that they got a kind of code and they're worshipping Jesus as a god. There's so much there. anyway outside the New Testament. So was Jesus a real person? Of course. Even the people that hate him are saying that he walked this earth. The question then, who is he? Now, is he God? Was he human? Well, this is where the New Testament has to come back in, and the reliability of the New Testament. What I've gone through today just only backs up the New Testament. So it adds to the New Testament that people are saying Jesus wasn't. Well, it corroborates what the New Testament says. All that says in the New Testament is exactly what these writers who weren't for Jesus and against Christians are saying. So now you have to go and show people that the New Testament and go through exactly the writings and where these things correspond. And now this is hugely important. This is the really important part. There's a lot of information there. There's a lot of evidence. Go through the video again, get your pen and paper, write it down, make notes. So when people come to you and say there is no evidence for Jesus outside the Bible and the Bible's unreliable, you say, okay, let's go through. And just remember Tacitus, Pliny and Josephus, and even the first part of Josephus, because people who know a bit will argue the second longer part, go for the shorter part. Fine, listen and lay the evidence back. And then, this is the key, and this is what we have to do as Christians. Go to that person, whoever's saying this stuff, and then say back to them, so what's your evidence? What is your evidence that the New Testament is not reliable? Where did you get that from? What's your sources that the New Testament isn't reliable? It is a biased document. Push back on them, because I think too often that we don't. And I've spent a long while on this video giving you lots of information, and giving myself actually, about the historical writings for Jesus outside of the Bible, which I will use. But if I stop there and give a really good robust defense of my Christian faith, it's not really going to help the other person. What you need to do is say to the other person, what's the premise of your argument? Where's your thrust coming from? Where's your evidence that the Bible is unreliable, that the New Testament is unreliable, that these sources are corrupted? And ask that question and get people to respond to you, and then listen, because with all this and all the pieces of paper that I have on the floor, it's a robust evidence that is there, and outside of the Bible, and outside of Christianity, and outside of Christians who wrote it. But where's theirs? Push back, so you can, as Greg Cole says, put a stone in their shoe and get them to really think about what they're saying and where they're coming from, and really doubt what they're saying, because most of the time it's not backed up by such evidence as we have. So what do you think, or what do you know? Do you know if there's any more sources out there that speak of Jesus or speak of Christians in those early times outside of the New Testament, outside of Christian writings, of course, because there's lots of letters from the early church fathers? Put them in the comments below. Or do you totally disagree? You still think that these guys are wrong, or they had other motives, or something else? I don't know. Love to hear your responses, or your answers, or even your questions. Put in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I hope that it has been helpful, whether you're Christian or not. That it's encouraged you or it's challenged you. Subscribe to the channel, like this video so more people can see it, and it can help them or challenge them either way. And I will see you soon. Bye. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the Bible, and that it is your word, and it is true, and it stood the foundation of time. But also because you did come to earth and you did walk on earth, that other people have seen that of those times and have written about your times and the effect of your life on many Christians back then, how they lived in such a countercultural way, and how they died knowing that they were going to be with you. May you teach us today to be like that, to be faithful witnesses to you, that we may look forward to being in glory with you forever. And we pray all this in your name. Amen.